Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the path to World War II, specifically the rise of dictatorships in Europe. We're going to look at how those kind of started and who is going to be in control of those. So we're first talking about nationalism, and we kind of talked about nationalism as one of those causes of World War I. It's that extreme pride in your country, that America type thing. And what we see is following World War I, we see this real surge in nationalism, where there's a ton of more people having this extreme pride in their country and specifically in their cultures or their ethnicities. And a lot of this comes from those failures of that treaty agreement in World War I. Placing the blame completely on Germany, taking away land from Germany, taking away land from Russia. And so what we see is that there's less tolerance for those people who don't quite fit in with the dominant culture, or less respect and less tolerance for other countries. So let's just look at kind of some of the other problems that were left after World War I. A lot of countries were really deep in poverty. There was a Great Depression going on in Europe, just like there was in the United States, and actually a lot of countries in Europe were a lot worse off than the countries than the United States was. And especially when we're talking about Germany. Germany not only found itself in debt from the war, but remember during the war a lot of Germans were starving, and now they had these huge war debts, and they had lost a lot of their very profitable colonies and territories. So if you were in Germany at the time, it was very common to see people begging in the street, starvation, people having no homes. If you're looking at here is a battlefield monument. Remember, World War I, France was torn apart. There were a lot of battles throughout there. Some farms, like this is a farm, this is an old trench from World War I, so farms were completely decimated and the land had to be brought back to be able to use in agriculture. I mean, you can imagine you're looking at, this was no man's land. Imagine if this was your farm before World War I, and then World War I ends. I mean, how do you turn this into, agricultural land again? How do you make that profitable? It's going to take a while. And how do you survive until then? And so what this is going to do is really lay kind of the framework and lay an opening for these dictators, which are going to be men who are very good at public speaking, or who are going to make these promises to tell people they're going to help make things better. So we're first going to talk about the Soviet Union. We know that there was the Russian Revolution that happened, and then as things kind of progress through, we get the Soviet Union, or the United Socialist Soviet Republic. Well, in 1924, Joseph Stalin is going to take over the Soviet Union, and when he does, he's going to take and make it a complete communist state, where he puts himself as the head of the government and becomes a dictator. In the Soviet Union, almost all businesses were owned by the government. There were a few small farms that were held by the peasants who are going to remain in their hands, and there will be a couple of businesses that will remain with individual owners, but the majority, the vast majority, almost all businesses in the Soviet Union are going to be owned by the government. So this is going to bring about what we call a totalitarian state. And what that means is that the government has complete control over citizens. People don't have rights. Any kind of opposition or talking against the government or maybe questioning the government is completely stopped. You're not allowed to do that. Anyone who speaks up against the government is going to find themselves at the very least in jail. And especially when we're talking about the Soviet Union, this was how it worked. Stalin kept a very rigid or firm control over the people of the Soviet Union. The government was in control. more specifically, Stalin was in control. And if anyone started to get popular, even some of his closest advisors, if they started to gain popularity, he would be afraid he would lose that, and so he would have them killed and removed. And the same thing with anyone, a normal person in the Soviet Union. If you didn't do what the government wanted, you were going to find yourself in big trouble. This could be put in jail. More likely, you would be relocated to a work camp in Siberia, or you would be killed. So what about Italy? Well, Italy, Mussolini is going to take over control of Italy, and he's going to get control by playing on people's fears. He's going to tell people that all these bad things are going to happen unless he comes in and takes control. And he's like, it's what's best for Italy. We're going to do what's best for Italy. The individual person isn't as important as our country. And when someone talks like that, what you're talking about is what is known as fascism. And fascism stresses the nation, the nation as a whole, and it puts the needs of the country over the individual. And in its extreme form, that means that, especially with Mussolini, if he could somehow say you were against what was best for the country, he would have you killed or thrown in jail. As far as Germany, Adolf Hitler is going to take control in 1933. A lot of people always wonder how Hitler could have gotten control. Well, Hitler actually was one of the most amazing public speakers in world history. He could hit these audiences just all kinds, like riled up. And when he came into Germany, what he did was he promised that he was going to take Germany from this depression that they were in, where people didn't have enough food, they didn't have houses, and he was going to make Germany great again. He talked about how people couldn't have pride in being Germans because of how low Germany was, and he said, we are going to get back that German pride. And people really, they clung on to that, and so they allowed Hitler to take control and to get power. So when we're talking about Hitler, what were kind of the beliefs that he put into when he was in control of Germany? Well, first, what he wanted to do is bring together all German-speaking people into one country. And you have to remember that countries like Austria, parts of what was then Czechoslovakia, there were German-speaking citizens living in those areas. And so he wanted to get all those areas into Germany. Now, what that means is he was looking for expansion. He was looking to take over more territory for Germany. He did believe in racial purification, or a master race of people. And once again, like I was talking about, expansion. He said Germany needed more space, and he wanted to make Germany grow. And so, it comes back to that, why Hitler, we knowing what we know, how could anyone let, someone like that take power? You're starving in the streets, and someone says they're going to make things better, and people believed it. And so he is going to take control. So now we're going to kind of leave Europe, and we're going to talk about what was happening in Japan during this time too. Well, militarists are going to take control of Japan, and they will leave the emperor in power, not in power, but they will leave him. But he basically becomes like a figurehead without a lot of real power. You can kind of think of it like the British monarchy is today. Queen Elizabeth doesn't really have a lot of power, but she's kind of like the face of Great Britain. For Japan, they wanted more space also, and so they're going to take over Manchuria. Well, when they take Manchuria, the League of Nations is called in. And you'll remember the League of Nations was created following World War I, and the League of Nations kind of went to Japan, and they were like, hey, you can't do this. But they had no real power. They didn't have anything to back that up. They didn't have a military. They didn't have really any say except for to say, don't do that. And so they couldn't really do anything. Japan saw this, and Japan's like, well, we're just going to keep Manchuria. We'll just pull out of the League of Nations. Do what you're going to do. And the League of Nations couldn't do anything. And it's really important to note that, because it's going to be what Hitler, when Hitler sees all this happening, Hitler's going to say, well, if Japan doesn't have to, and they didn't do anything to Japan, then why are we following all these rules still from the treaty? Okay, so what do all of these dictators have in common? Well, they all wanted land, and they all wanted to have pretty much complete control over their countries. So now we're going to be kind of talking about how World War II really gets started, that progression. So the first thing we have was what's called the Munich Agreement. And in this, what happens is that Hitler will decide that he wants Czechoslovakia. And so he will actually go to France and Britain, because they were allies with them, and say, hey, if you give me Czechoslovakia, I won't take any more. This is all I want. As long as you give me this, I'm totally great. And they did. And so Winston Churchill will speak up, and he will say that's an act of appeasement. It's basically you're just giving him what he wants, and it's wrong. Like, you can't just give him something that's not ours to give. You're just appeasing him. You're just making him feel better. And he said that was the time, we should be standing up and stopping this now. And if you don't know, Winston Churchill is going to become the Prime Minister of Great Britain. So Hitler gets Czechoslovakia. Now we're going to watch a short little video on appeasement.
At home. I can't believe it. Hitler said he'd leave it at just taking the Rhineland, but now it's annexation of his neighbor Austria. He wants an Anschluss of those people and the Germans. When will this madness end? And I know, and I know, and I know there's 3 million ethnic Germans in the Sudeten land. And I know, and I know, and I know I won't fight a war to save my Czechoslovakian friend. So one last time I'm meeting you with Hitler and friends. One last time I will give in to Hitler's demands. Look at us, we have secured peace in our time. I wish Winston Churchill would fall in line. So one last time I will love peace and keep my troops at home. I should have stopped that Nazi, he just took the whole country. And he made friends with Stalin. Oh, when will this madness end? September 1939. He's crossed the line, invaded Poland, and I will take no more. It's the last time friends and Great Britain will declare war. We had to choose between dishonor and war, but Hitler is a man that shouldn't be ignored. It's all about time to fight the man we should class. There you go, Neville Chamberlain.
So that was a short video kind of talking about how the Prime Minister before Churchill, Neville Chamberlain, really went into this act of appeasement and why, he kind of let Hitler take more and more places and why Great Britain didn't stop in before. And it is, kind of easy for us to sit back now and say, well, why wasn't he stopped right away? But you have to take into consideration at the time, people had just recently got out of a world war. People are trying to kind of still rebuild Europe, and so this idea of getting into another world war was really scary. And so, they kind of turned, let's just see, maybe it won't be that bad. So, just kind of like the video was talking about, Germany will continue to add areas, Austria, and then when Germany invades Poland, England and France will declare war on Germany. And this happens on September 3rd of 1939. Very quickly, France falls. This right here is showing Hitler in Paris, obviously, in front of the Eiffel Tower. With France falling and with that pact that Hitler will have with the Soviet Union for just a little while, that really means that what's left is going to be Great Britain. Because by this point, Belgium has fallen, all of those areas have really started to fall. And so Hitler's going to begin to focus on a war with Britain. Now, Hitler will also begin to kind of go back on that agreement with Stalin and will try to attack the Soviet Union and take over because there's a lot of resources there that he needed for his war. So that's going to be kind of what happens with Hitler. He'll be fighting a two-front war. So going into this whole Battle of Britain, Britain still had the premier navy at the time. Germany knew that they did not have the resources yet to compete with Britain's navy, and so they began an air war, or a Luftwaffe. And Germany will be building up its navy, especially when we're going to talk about U-boats again, or also submarines. But really the Battle of Britain is going to be an air war. What's going to happen is that Hitler is going to send bombs, airplanes, over to bomb Britain, just night and day, like constant. And so in Great Britain, it really becomes this, the government and the king are going to be like, we can make it. You just have to keep calm and carry on. So if you've ever seen that poster, it says keep calm and carry on. Now you kind of know where that comes from. On the Eastern Front for Hitler, it's going to be Germany versus the Soviets. Hitler is going to try and take on the Soviets, especially there's going to be very heavy losses for the Soviets in these battles. Hitler was once again had a lot better technology, a more elite fighting force, but the Soviets have that grit and determination, and really one of the big reasons that the Soviets are going to be able to keep Hitler away from taking over the Soviet Union is the winter. You might remember learning about Napoleon attacking the Soviets in the winter, and it didn't go so well. Well, it didn't go so well for Hitler either. Just to kind of give you an idea of how bad the fighting was in the Soviet Union, during the Battle of Stalingrad, this is one battle, the Soviets are going to lose 1.1 million soldiers in one battle. That's going to be more than all of the American deaths during the entire war. So once again, like we saw in World War I, where the death toll for the Soviets at that time, or the Russians, was very high, World War II, we're going to see those same numbers of deaths because it's going to be on their home front. They don't have the same technological advances that Germany has, and it's important to remember these death tolls and this lack of technology because it really will help us to explain a lot of what's going to happen during the Cold War in the Soviet Union. So this is just kind of this end slide to show you, dictatorships by 1938 are going to be this purple color right here, so you can see all of the various dictatorships that come in. These are going to be the democracies. By 1940, all of these little democracies have now fallen to dictatorships. So you can see when we're looking at, by the time we get to 1940, you really have Great Britain, Ireland, Sweden, and Finland. and Switzerland, of course, remaining neutral. That's it. Everything else is going to be in control of dictatorships. So that's going to be the rise of dictatorships in Europe, well, and in Japan too. And it's going to be as we're leading into the United States entering World War II.